And we are live. Hello, Assalamualaikum, and welcome. We are going to be doing this show in English, and I am very fortunate today to have one of, I would say, and I'm going to embarrass him a little bit, maybe go here and there. I give my form of introduction for my guest today. Yasser Latif Hamdani is one, I believe, of one of the most significant lawyers from South Asia right now. He's done some very interesting things, from being the lead counsel, and we'll ask him whether that's the technical term, and being basically responsible for getting YouTube freed from government censorship in Pakistan at one point. And of course, as folks know, that kind of censorship and blocking goes back and forth. But Yasser is, if I may summarize, Yasser is officer of the court in Pakistan, called to the bar in the UK, member of the Lincoln's Inn, like his hero and our hero and icon, being, as we actually, let me put it like this. Yasser is the other person who, like me, identifies himself as a Jinnahist, which is not a negative ideology or anti-anything. It's just that we believe our political and worldview comes, especially our idea of politics and society, is hugely influenced by what Mr. Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, but also a major South Asian legal mind, was, how he thought and what he presented. So, Yasser Saab, Assalamu alaikum, welcome.
Welcome.
I want to jump into an issue that is, ripped from the headlines both in the US and South Asia. But before that, I would like to say welcome. I believe you've had a change in your own geographical location and so on. So would you like to update us very briefly on what's going on with you and your life?
Yeah, I've moved to Atlanta, Georgia, in the US, and that's recent. The move itself was long time coming, but ultimately this year we decided to, or not this year, 2024, we decided to take the plunge and come to the US.
So as I guess over the last 2,000 years, a lot of significant events have happened around Christmas. So I believe you moved around Christmas. We touched base briefly, and now you are here. And I was saying to you just a couple of days ago that no sooner had you set foot in the US that the issue, the legal issue of Just Soli is now again in the headlines. And one of the first things President Trump did as he was sworn in, or immediately after being sworn in, was sign an executive order. The way I would describe it is muddying the issue of birthright citizenship. Back in South Asia, it is being headlined as Trump cancels or does away with or abolishes the right of birthright citizenship. I guess over the last day or so, you and I have finally managed to read the executive order as it is on the White House website. I personally was surprised at how well thought out it is, because it limits. I'd like to first hear from you on this issue, and then of course we can, and it will be an interesting topic to go back and discuss this whole issue of birthright citizenship with people born or who live in places like the US or Canada take for granted, and yet it is not that easy an issue. My understanding is even in Britain right now, your parents have to be born citizens for you to be a born citizen. So even as Westerners, especially, or people who are, let's say, non-white, immigrants and their children take it for granted. Even in Britain, it is not a right. So please have at it. First of all, let's tell you, you just landed in the US and this issue comes up. Tell us your reaction.
Well, I find it strange, and it's interesting. Trump has been talking about it for a while. He was against birthright citizenship to begin with, and that's something he campaigned on. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you would be surprised. The only country in Asia which has birthright citizenship is Pakistan.
Sir, I'm going to come back and ask you about that, because in practicality, I don't see it being implemented. Or do you want to touch base on it now? I mean,
we can talk about it later. We can talk about.
Yeah.
I think there are problems, but by law there is birthright citizenship in Pakistan. But here it's a constitutional right.
Right.
and which can't be undone by an executive order. And that's what, going forward, we'll see a number of challenges that will come up. And I believe there's already been a challenge that the court has actually said that it's blatantly unconstitutional, the Trump order, the executive order that he's passed. Now, the executive order itself is drafted very well, as you pointed out. It begins by saying that the intent of the 14th Amendment, which is where the birthright citizenship comes from, the 14th Amendment was intended to undo a wrong that was done through the Dred Scott decision, which is that African people of African descent did not have citizenship to the US. That was sort of the reason why the 14th Amendment had come, and that is true. That was the case. However, the way it's drafted, what the executive order is saying essentially is that, or it's playing on the word subject to jurisdiction. That's the key phrase that they're sort of hedging everything on. The subject to jurisdiction, people who are either born or are naturalized and are subject to the jurisdiction. Now, what they mean by that is that if a person was born to, say, a person who's unlawfully here in the US. So if someone was unlawfully here and they have a child in the US, they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's the argument that the White House, the sort of the executive order that's on the White House website is making. That's sort of how it's going forward. But the Constitution is very clear. With the 14th Amendment, it's talking about subject to jurisdiction, but it also talks about, so if you look at the language, the word subject to jurisdiction then applies not just to people who are born here, but people who are naturalized. So the question of what it means to be subject to jurisdiction, anyone who is in the United States, regardless of what their visa status is, regardless of what, if they're illegal, or if they're on H-1B, or if they're on some other visa, or even the student visa for that matter, they are at all times subject to US jurisdiction. And that's blatantly sort of one of the things that strikes you in that executive order. So this argument that they've made, and that's why the executive order starts off by saying that the 14th Amendment never intended, or some language like that, never actually intended it to sort of bring in its ambit everyone who's born here in the US. So that's, I think it would be challenged, and I don't see that happening. The president of the United States, as strong as he is, as in office, the president of the United States is a very, very there's a lot of centralization, and there's a lot of executive authority that the president of the United States brings. But I don't think just simply with an executive order you can overturn a constitutional amendment. So I do see this being challenged ultimately.
So I basically want to play devil's advocate here. I'm going to try to, even though it's rather hard for me on this issue. The thing is, what that order is saying, and the way I read it on the White House website, is that they are saying that subject to the jurisdiction means that if they are subject to, what basically they're saying is, even if you're on a visa, you are not subject to the jurisdiction, meaning you're not a permanent resident and therefore you're not there. If you are a visa person, you are basically a legal alien. You are a foreigner. You are not our citizen, and therefore it doesn't apply. And the one thing I've seen them do is, you will notice that they've laid out male, female separately, that if the mother is illegal and the father is not basically either a permanent resident or a citizen, or the other way around, and they've laid it out. And so basically they are saying is, unless, and one thing, another way to put it would be, unless one of your parents is a citizen or permanent resident, which basically is a second class citizenship as far as I'm concerned, unless one of your parents, because they can't deny someone whose parent is a citizen, even if it's one parent. That is why they have written it so clearly. They have said if one person is on a visa, even if they are legal, and the other is illegal. And they haven't even touched the case where both parents are on visas, right? So the way a lot of us became American or moved to the US is that both parents are legal, right? So this is actually a very limited hit. And part of what I see is this is basically a way of muddying the waters. That's all I can say, right? It doesn't, because people have been asking us from India, from Pakistan, or mentioning, oh, they've done away. And I'm actually, what really frustrates me, I've seen several Indian headlines, and these are, established outlets like NDTV or India Today, whose headline basically just said, Trump does away with birthright citizenship. That is clickbait. That is simply clickbait. In fact, it threw me for a while. What the heck are they talking? But talk about that. I mean, they have really crafted it in a very limited way. What I mean, I know it's a weak argument. What's your take on subject to jurisdiction? Meaning, if neither parent is a citizen and at least one of them is actually illegal, that's the condition on
Mhm.
which this applies, right?
Exactly. And again, when we talk about subject to jurisdiction, that becomes a question. I mean, obviously, if you're a citizen, if you're not a citizen, and if you're, if say, for example, when I was going to college, I was an F1 student. I was subject to the jurisdiction of the United States as as a legal alien in the country. So this argument doesn't appeal to me. This argument that I mean, but in terms of what they've done, they've basically crafted out this situation where at least one parent, and that parent being, I mean, if the mother's a permanent resident or a citizen, that's one thing. But if the father is a permanent resident or a citizen of the United States and the mother is illegal, that raises, that's where, so there is a certain amount of cover for that as well. But what they've done is, you see a lot of people, and this is true of many Pakistanis I know, who would come to the US, and it's sad to say this, who would come to the US and have kids and then go back, on and this
Yeah,
would be a visitor
we've all
visa.
seen
So
that.
there
Right.
was a lot of that happening. The reason why you have birthright citizenship in any country is to ensure that there's no statelessness, that ultimately, if because ultimately there would be people, US is or was seen for the longest time as this haven for refugees and asylum seekers from around the world. It was, and that's the promise of the US, was that beacon, that give me your 100 masses and that sort of thing, the promise as it is. So US was always open to that. So this idea that anyone who's born in the US is a US citizen is has a lot of promise for, or as a nexus to the very ideals that the US is founded on, right? I mean, it is a country of immigrants, and it is, sort of, uh, it has always prided itself in opening doors to people who are coming from. So by hitting at this, I think the president is hitting at the very root of what it means to be an American in this country.
Um, Again, I would, as a devil's advocate, say he is basically standing up for one view of what it means to be an American, right? He's attacking what you might call the liberal view or the progressive view, the libs view of what it means to be an American. And by the way, that I was just thinking that situation where, basically what was, I think, citizenship tourism, you could call it, right? A lot of people would do that. We know Pakistanis that have done that, Indians that have done that. Pakistanis often, not to call them out, but PIA crew would do that. They turn up in the US 9 months pregnant, have a kid, and leave. And then the kid would, by definition, be a citizen. I mean, that it's not exactly the same situation, but that is what made Bruce Lee an American, right? Because
Mhm.
he grew up in Hong Kong, but he just happened to have been born in the US while his mother was here. So, but even in that case, I think this doesn't apply. Because if both parents are here on legal visas, then this very narrowly written order doesn't apply to that, right?
Mhm. Well,
So,
it doesn't, but it's what it's done is, it's you see, I think what it talks about in the executive order, it talks about um temporary your presence in the
visas.
US, temporary visas as well, and it excludes that.
No,
That's
but
my
but
reason.
it carves out a specific situation where that one parent is even on a temporary visa and the other is illegal. I don't
Hmm.
think it. Did I read it wrong? But I don't think it addresses to where they're both on temporary visas.
Hmm. Well,
But
the
let's see. I mean, as you said, this fight will just end up in the courts, and I just
it
already
will
saw
definitely. Hmm.
I already saw a tweet from Keith Ellison, Attorney General of Minnesota, and also, as a footnote, first Muslim in Congress. But Keith has already posted about I'm going to challenge this, and we've already filed in the Supreme Court. This is an automatic Supreme Court case, as far as we know, right? It's going to be what it is. It will be interesting. I don't know about exciting, but it'll be interesting to watch how this goes through, and it'll become a test case for how the Supreme Court
Yeah, and the
behaves under.
Supreme Court would have to undo 130 years of jurisprudence, right? This was the Wong Ark case from 1890 something,
Yeah,
which
1896
established.
for the law, 1898 for the last decision, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that was when my grandfather's elder brother was born. Anyway,
I
so
would.
let's move on from this. Do give us a little bit of this because it now piques my curiosity about. I've always wondered about this. You have always said that Pakistan provides birthright citizenship. If you're born in the jurisdiction of Pakistan, you are a citizen. However, we have this situation where we have millions, literally millions of people in refugee status in Pakistan, right? For example, to use the case of the Afghan refugees, they are refugees. And again, in Urdu, we get into this thing about Muhajir versus Panagir versus whatever, and then General Zia muddied the waters in there. That's a whole other discussion. But the question is, the children of Afghan refugees born in Pakistan, and forget the practical situation, as you see it, under the constitution, they should be citizens, right?
Yeah, they are, for all practical purposes. The Citizenship Act of 1951 makes them citizens, and that's the tragedy of the children of Afghan refugees. The state is basically denying them a right that it has already given them. They should be citizens, and that's by law. But again, in Pakistan, we see that the implementation of law is always conspicuously absent, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what we've seen with this. But I absolutely think that all Afghan refugees who've had kids, and those kids are at least Pakistanis.
Right.
Um,
And I mean, besides practically, which because they are, basically they are Pashtun or Pathan children born in Pakistan, they should be Pakistanis. There's no two ways about that. But like you said, the state has been using this as a political football. You can only get me started on the word Mahajir versus Panagir versus whatever. When they first started coming, I remember the headlines or TV discussions that initially in Urdu described them as Panagir, which is refugee. But then they started using the word Afghan Muhajirin, which I think was a conscious ploy from the Zia regime, right? Where they shifted from Panagir to Muhajir, which then gets us to today, where someone like Basha Khan's great grandson, Amal Wali, can get up and start equating Afghan refugees with the people in Karachi that call themselves Muhajir, right? It's weird. And the funny thing is, no one even challenged that. I mean,
mhm,
even those calling him out for being racist or raising a racist issue did not call him out on the technicality of it. Do you have
mhm.
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's as far as I wasn't aware of this statement by Emil Wali Khan, but the I've always had this view of Pashtun ethno-nationalists. Maybe it's not a very politically correct thing to say, but I found a certain amount of um, racial bias that always emerges from their leadership. So I think that and that's just generally when we talk about Muhajirs in Karachi. One of the things, especially Muhajirs in Hyderabad and Karachi, the urban areas of Sindh, this kind of racism is not just Pashtuns. You hear this same kind of racism from Sindhis and
Right, from
sometimes
Sunnis, from
Baloch,
Punjabi. And
yeah,
and also,
Punjabis.
and the reverse side, it has to be said, Muhajirs, Urdu speakers have their own brand of racial elitism, is the
Yeah.
politest way to put it. That is in itself there. But if we're going to have principled discussion, then we need to call out racism where it is racism. And again, I'm actually happy. Even my brother still challenges me on using the word racism in a Pakistani context. But basically, that's what it is, right?
It is.
It is the English word is racism. Anyway, so this is the discussion on, and as you pointed out, this is the technical principle in law is just solely, which is birthright citizenship. And let's not even discuss India because we're not in that context, and we would need an Indian representation to have that discussion. But I happened to mention this to an Indian friend of mine, Indian Canadian friend of mine yesterday, and then it became a very long discussion because they have their own struggle with citizenship.
Mhm.
Their citizenship laws are defined around, I think, 1954, and then there was grandfathering in, and there was things moving around. Then there was the issue up in the Northeast, in Assam, where the Assamese ethnic identity was butting up against Bengali refugees, a lot of them Hindu, and that was a long-running issue, part of the Assamese agitation. And then the BJP came and then weaponized that issue to create a national issue about Muslims and citizenship, and that whole thing. I guess I provided a little thumbnail of that, but let's not go there. It's not our topic. How are you doing, sir? I actually wanted our first conversation online to be about, if you would care to share or want to share, or to the extent you want to share your thoughts about your move from Pakistan. You've been a very active and very strong voice, socially, legally, on Pakistan, on issues in Pakistan, minority issues, human rights issues. You've always defined yourself as a conscious Jinnahist, which I know I'm active on the left and often describe myself as that. It makes people uneasy, to say the least.
Mhm.
Uh, before I let you speak, I'll say I still say to people, we have this underlay of Islam and Muslim culture and history, and in those terms, I always say to people, there comes a time in someone's life, वक्त आता है जब आप पे हिजरत वाजिब हो जाती है, meaning it becomes a duty to yourself, to your family, to emigrate. And the UN Human Rights Charter and all provides you that, right? If you have to, you should. And again, we're back to asylum issues. The US has treaties and laws saying that if you decide you are not safe in one country, you move to another. But the kind of hijrat that maybe you've done, we all did as younger people, was not outright by direct fear of persecution or fear of their life. I mean, we have people we point to, right? Everyone from Sabine Mahmoud to Raza Rumi, who've had to either, lose their lives or leave the country in a hurry. What were your thoughts? And I know, like you said, it's been a long time coming and must have been an agonizing process for you.
Yeah, I think the thing with Pakistan is, and this is more so over the last decade or so, Pakistan has been made a living sort of nightmare by those who've ruled it. I'll be very honest about it. Right now, I mean, just the freedom of being able to access the internet, in Pakistan, that's now becoming something that's I mean, you don't. There are websites. So, for example, you can't access Twitter in Pakistan, right? So just that sort of stifling environment. Then you've got sort of your TLPs and whatnot running around, doing Sartan se Juda and that sort of thing. All of this kind of. I mean, I find myself. I'm obviously very sad about leaving Pakistan, but I do see that in this case, Hijrat was the only option left. You know, um, and then there's the economic situation. The economic situation of Pakistan is terrible, and that's primarily because we haven't solved these other issues. These other issues contribute to Pakistan being economically backward, and we've seen what's happening. First, and we've seen what happened with Nawaz Sharif when he fell in 2018, and that 2017. That's when sort of this whole tamasha started in Pakistan, and now Imran Khan is at the receiving end of it. So this hybrid state and this weird sort of facade that Pakistan has of electoral democracy all of these things kind of do make it hard for someone who's trying to do something, take any progressive action in Pakistan. So I feel now that all of the things that I've done, I feel I can do them better sitting outside, because there's a certain amount of freedom that I just don't have in Pakistan. For example, just to give you an example, when in Pakistan, if I spoke up about Ahmadis, Ahmadis being one of the issues that I speak about, I would not call them Muslims, whereas I do think they're Muslims, but I can't call them Muslims in Pakistan because I might be arrested, you know. I might be arrested for calling their mosques, you know, for saying that they're. So all of these things can automatically land me in jail, So that's the kind of fear one had to operate in, and that's something hopefully, is something that one doesn't have to worry about when here.
Sorry, Hani, although, I wanted to, I there's a couple of things where I wanted to pull at least your leg on because I know I can. Well, this whole thing about realizing that or saying that the elite has messed up the Pakistani situation in the last 10 years, I always challenge to people. In fact, one of the tags I use for these YouTube things is 3.5 plus, where I say that in the Pakistani context, three and a half plus provinces of Pakistan, and you're a legal expert, you will understand better why I'm saying 3.5 plus, because there are four provinces and there's a couple of plus things out there.
Mhm.
So, other than the northern half of Punjab, the rest of the country already always both realized what the elite was doing, was the victim of all of that. What happened in Karachi over the decades, and what happened in Balochistan was worse. And it
Mhm.
didn't start in the last 10 years, right? So, do you have a reply to that, or at least any thoughts on that? That, this whole thing, I want to be supportive of people who have now realized, even PTI supporters who now realize that, the establishment, the security establishment, the military, whatever, has finally they've realized what that establishment, and I think our intellectual friends on the left call it a comprador establishment, basically the people that the British picked to be their middle management, their compradors, their overseers over the South Asia, and they're generationally, those are the groups and families and classes which have been in control, and they've always been in control, especially in Pakistan, because Pakistan was formed, for my money, from the most feudal parts of British India. And
Mhm.
therefore, the structure of Pakistan is still completely feudal and has been from the beginning, plus the oppression, the military interference in politics, the elite capture of Pakistan. And as some historians will tell you, in the beginning, establishment meant the bureaucracy. And in that, by the way, all the elite that was being used, or the elite that was living off the fat of the land, came from all ethnic groups. There was a
Mhm.
lot of Punjabis, and in the beginning, there was more than their share of Urdu speaking or Muhajir voices in it, right? When I left in Pakistan in 94, people used to say, listen, 14 out of 24 of the federal secretary level people in Pakistan are still Urdu speaking. What are you
Mhm.
talking about, right? So that is what it is. But that elite has always, lived off the fat of the land. And for someone to say that only in the last, I would like to challenge you on that. Only over
Mhm.
the last years has this happened. I thought this has been happening all along. I mean, our parents in Karachi have been mumbling and muttering under their breath about this for as long as I've been alive, and I've been alive for more than 50 years.
Mm. No, you're right. You're right. I, stand corrected on that. I just feel over the last 10 years, when I said was when I began to feel the pinch of it, you know,
Right.
because I
That
do
makes
live
sense.
I do
Right.
live in Lahore. So, that's,
Fair enough. Fair
so I
enough.
began
And
to
that's why I
feel,
have this, as a welcome, I had this background from Lahore on my wall.
yeah.
Anyway, so yeah,
So
no,
I,
but and the thing is, I am sympathetic. I'm not saying I'm not being angry at you. I'm just saying that we do need to open this discussion up.
we
And
do.
now that you are here, let's do it. So that was your exit. Now, how about the welcome interview? I mean, how are you finding the US? What is your first reaction, besides discovering Harritos, as I saw on your
Mhm.
Facebook feed? How are you finding it? I mean, all of that, half a century of indoctrination from Hollywood. How is that standing up to the first-hand experience?
Well, this is the first time I've sort of come this south in the US, right? I mean,
Uh,
New Jersey and Boston and all of those areas I was very familiar with from back in the college days. But this is the first time I've come to the south, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting, the whole culture and sort of, the way. So Atlanta itself, obviously a very diverse city, has a lot of African Americans and that sort of thing, and you just get that feel, that whole Civil War era, sort of. So it's been eye opening in terms of, because I've never, so that's because it's the south of the US. If it
right.
was in the south, I mean, in New Jersey or Boston or somewhere, I would have, would have been business as usual.
No, but there's a difference between being a student in the US and now being here, if I dare say, as an independent adult, having to be, in America, subject to the jurisdiction of America, as the Trump White House might put it, and also being an adult, having to live that life, and also the other aspect, being a Pakistani in America, being a Muslim in America, being an activist and a legal player or legal mind, having to navigate and looking at this place in a different view. That's the side I really want to hear from you. I can see you're still processing it, so we'll come back to this with you
Mhm.
over time and sort of follow your journey. In fact, I'd invite
Yeah,
you to
no,
sort of give us
I would
occasional
love to
updates.
keep you posted. I'd love to keep you posted. I'm still, sort of trying to get my bearings. So yeah, you're right.
I mean, the one thing I like to often say is Pakistan and America actually have a lot in common. In our cultural, moorings, we're both pretty conservative. Beside, notwithstanding people like you and me, the average American, the average Pakistani, they're conservative, check. Their faith plays a large part in their lives and their political discourse, check. And then some of the whole issues of right versus left and conservative, even some of our leaders are parallel uh, sort of vibes to that, right?
Mhm. No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. There are those similarities. And I think it speaks to this idea of this newness as well, right? I mean, US is a relatively new country in the world, and Pakistan is one of the newest in that sense, going only 70 years. So there's this idea, as some sort of a haven, as US was supposed to be, and as Pakistan was supposed to be. So there are those common aspects. I think one of the things that is very, very common between, or is absolutely common between US and Pakistan, is they both have sort of an post enlightenment idea of what it means to be a citizen or a national of these places. There's no blood and soil uh, nationalism here. I mean, most of the people in the US are immigrants. A large part of Pakistan's population is immigrant. Uh, to be an American is essentially an idea of the mind. If you think about it, I mean,
Right.
other than the Native Americans, there's hardly anyone who can actually claim to be some sort of blood and soil American nationalist, right? I mean, and so that's the same thing with Pakistan. There wasn't a Pakistan before 47. So I think all of those things do play in. I see those similarities, Pakistan and US. I think in that sense they are those post Enlightenment states that have come, into existence.
And in fact, I sometimes nowadays think that Jinnah's Pakistan, as we call it now, exists only in Bangladesh,
Hmm.
because they seem to be living that ideal better than West Pakistan or the current Pakistan has ever done it. But you sometimes raise this issue of Jinnah's political ideology being that of what do you call it, a consociational confederation or something. Uh,
Consociation, yes.
Consociational or consociation, and I'd like, maybe not right now, but I'd like to leave this in your mind to have a conversation at a time. At that ideal, I would like to really sit down and unpack with you.
Mm.
And the other thing I want to unpack is Jinnah Ka Pakistan and all of that, and also taking those ideas, especially now that neither of us actually in Pakistan, and seeing how some of that thought is applicable to the world today. Because I know you have at least one essay saying, those ideas need to be discussed again because they seem to be, or at least seem to have something to contribute to the global discussion right now. Because a lot of our countries now are that way. I mean, even countries like Germany, who are supposed to be monoethnic states, no longer are. Right? France, Germany, they're dealing with that issue. And in the US, like Pakistan, actually, it's almost a foundational thing, right? And so here it strikes me, here you sort of think about, does that fit what the US is and should be? I mean, I had this long discussion with a law student at one point because I was helping her with an essay where, the discussion about somewhere after the Civil War, even the federal government started describing us, or generally we started talking about this country rather than these United States. The singular versus plural idea, right? And the journey, as I see it, of Pakistan, of America, has been, since the Civil War, we've been headed towards a unitary state. Before that, it really was a confederation, and behaved more like it. So the federal government would also, when they talked and in legal briefs, they would write these United States. The foundational documents all say these United States, not this country. So if you care to discuss it a little right now, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, I'd like to leave it in your mind to sort of.
No, we should have a longer discussion because it speaks to the idea of federalism, I think, as well. Consociationalism, but also federalism, in a sense. So there's that. I think we should have a detailed discussion about this because I think there is a lot that can be learned from the politics of consociationalism, especially in a multicultural society. And to a certain extent, Canada, for example, does follow, a consociational model with Quebec, if you think about it. So there is that. Yeah. So in that sense, yes. As far as the idea of, I think consociationalism was an all India thing. It could have worked, and I think that was the only way you could have kept India together as one country. And
the British Indian Empire.
The British Indian Empire, because there wasn't any, there wasn't any India before the British came. If you think about it, if you look at it.
Right. No, don't get me started on that one. Because most of the empires that you think about, where half of them were in Central Asia.
Yeah. So that's what I think. In that sense, the consociational model was the only way that could have kept united, and there was almost that possibility with the cabinet mission plan, but it didn't go through. So we should have a detailed discussion about this, just on this issue.
Yeah, no, that's why I was talking about this as sort of a welcome interview, because there's so much to talk to you about this. And before you get too busy in your new life, I think it's a good idea to capture your thoughts, and maybe it'll even help you, sort of talk to America, so to speak, and sort of get your thoughts as they're developing. And now, as you said, you're freer to talk. Not that you've ever held your horses, or held your fire, generally speaking. And it's been a joy to watch you. Welcome, sir. And we're all here. We should keep having these discussions.
We must definitely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for welcoming me.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to end this now. Folks, in our audience, as you've heard, Yasser Latif Hamdani is here. We had this conversation. I've been wanting to talk to him forever, and now that he's also, as we say, between jobs, we should capture as much as we can of his time and thoughts, and sort of include him in the discussion. I think he has a lot to offer, and this goes to the deeper idea of the South Asian experience, which is a quarter of humanity, having much to offer the rest of the world, historically, socially, and as you might have noticed, live and in the moment, we have a lot to offer based on our experiences, the journey we've had over the last 200, 300, 400 years. And we'll take it from there. So thank you. This is Fakir signing off with Yasser Latif Hamdani Saab. And see you next time.